Well, I think your analysis was very straight-lined. History doesn't run in a straight line.
Kid, you cannot tell your neighbor he is stealing ducks when you are stealing frogs.
As High Commissioner, I was wrong. As Charandas Prasad, I reacted naturally how any person would have.
I did not come here for that kind of abuse. I did not come here for that kind of abuse. If you're going to go down that road, I'll walk off.
But it's all okay once they're talking. If they were talking, I could not have been here today.
You got ADHD.
I ain't got nothing.
Calm down.
I think I've done enough in terms of taking our team out of trouble from losing.
Tomorrow, Taylor. That's good. I'm reading the script now, and the first person that comes to my mind to play a detective,
Yes,
but
the
an
Chinese critic.
erratic
Mikhail
detective,
Rodriguez.
is Mikhail Rodriguez.
Why an African slap an Indian? Why a man and slap a woman? Look, how you deal with that? You deal with that.
We must encourage platforms like this because it brings together different people and allows for discussions to take place in our country on a multiplicity of fundamental issues.
Gildarie, you apologizing for something you think I did is wrong. I don't want you to do that, and you should not have done that. Hello, wherever you are, good night, good evening, good day, based on different time zones. This is the Gildarie Freddie Kissoon Show. We're now into our 17th month, and we have to thank you, the viewers, and also thank our guests. We have two guests here that have been very generous to us. They have patronized us with their time, and this is their third appearance, and we'd like to thank them. There are two experienced practitioners of politics, and between them I think it's almost 100 years in political experience, and therefore we will be given an opportunity tonight at profound analysis of what's going on in something that is unthinkable, that we never believe would happen, but it's happening, the genocide in Gaza. And we will have informed and profound analysis of the genocide in Gaza, but what happens to the world after this thing is over. This thing has traumatized the world, has divided the world, and it is simply unimaginable what is going on in Gaza when you consider what went on in Nazi Germany and in Rwanda. The debate is, are there dimensions of the genocide in Gaza that have comparative dimensions to the genocide in Germany and what happened in Rwanda, except that in Rwanda there's a difference. There wasn't an official government that was of the Hutu government chasing down and killing almost 1 million Tutsi. It was back and forth, and Hutu people, Hutu nationality, going around Rwanda hunting and killing Tutsis. What we had in Germany and what we have in Gaza are governments attacking civilian populations of a different ethnicity and killing them. I think there been 13,000 civilians that have been killed by the aerial bombing of Israel in an area 37 miles long and 4 miles wide. That has to be genocide. Of those 13,000, half of them have been women and children. In our studio to discuss the genocide in Gaza, how the world is reacting to the genocide, We hope to bring in these two gentlemen on their perception of the Western press and how it's carrying the stories. We hope to have the complete holistic picture of what is happening in genocide in Gaza. Leonard Gildarie, because of work, couldn't make it this evening. In our studio this evening is former Minister of Home Affairs, International Trade, but most of all, he spent a longer time in Foreign Affairs, Clement Rohee. And next to him is another long-standing practitioner of politics and the former Speaker of the National Assembly, Ralph Ramkarran. As usual, we go alphabetically, so we'll start with Clement Rohee. Clement, genocide in Gaza?
I'm not an expert on the matter, although I've been listening to the television. I look mainly at Al Jazeera TV channel because I did have the opportunity, I did take the opportunity to look occasionally at the BBC and the CNN, but to me, the ball-by-ball reporting that is presented by Al Jazeera for the entire day.
It's a better reporting, yeah.
And on live, on the spot. Reportages, I think, is, for me, the most informative and impressive. So I've been listening to, Al Jazeera usually calls up experts on this subject from all over the world. And I've listened to two persons who came from the era of the Second World War. They're still alive. And they were asked by one of the anchors at Al Jazeera if they thought that what was taking place in Gaza was a genocide. The older gentleman, one was a woman and one was a man. The older gentleman, he was more incisive in his analysis, but it took him a while before he actually got to the position where he said that what is happening there is laying the groundwork for genocide, for calling it genocide. The lady, on the other hand, she was more legalistic on the subject, and though she was not as decisive as the older gentleman was, in essence, you could see that she was apparently tempted to talk about or to say genocide, but she mentioned a number of factors or legal elements that had to be taken into consideration before you could actually definitively describe it, because she said once you do that, you have to have these definitive elements that become unquestionable to claim that what is taking place in Gaza is genocide. Well, that opened up a big debate in a show they usually have. And there's a division among the people who are debating this question as to whether it's actual genocide or not. Now, the political, legal people are more inclined to call it genocide, whereas the strictly legalistic approach by persons who probably served in different tribunals dealing with, for example, you mentioned Rwanda, then there's Bosnia. They were a little more hesitant to actually say it was or it is genocide. But I think the president recently come back from Saudi Arabia. He had a press conference recently, and he said something that struck me, which I think I would go with. He said that we are witnessing, that the world is witnessing for the first time televised genocide. I would go with that. I'm more political, Ralph is a legal political person, and he would probably have another perspective. But I would go with genocide from number one, an emotive point of view, historical, when you study the Palestinian issues and what they've gone through over the decades or centuries. And the description that the president gave on television, where he said the world is witnessing televised genocide, is something that I think I would go with for reasons which, in my own psychological understanding of this issue, seem to be an acceptable concept for now.
Ralph, you've been around a long time as a legal mind in Guyana. What is happening in Gaza meet the criterion or the criteria of genocide?
I don't think so, because genocide is commonly understood in its really technical sense as the elimination of an ethnic group. And it is far from the situation in Gaza, where Israel is eliminating an ethnic group, namely the Palestinians of Gaza. But I can sympathize with those people who think or who have the belief that this is a genocide. It is certainly a genocidal type of brutality, the brutality that gives you the feeling that the Israeli intention is to kill every single man, woman, and child in Gaza. And certainly the rhetoric that comes out of the right wing in Gaza, in Israel. Remember, there are a lot of Israelis and a lot of Jewish people, not only in Israel but around the world, who abhor what is going on in Gaza. So you need to make that distinction. But there are a lot of others, and some of them in the government and in leading positions, who are expressing a desire for the elimination of the Palestinians in Gaza. Netanyahu referred to a religious quote from the Bible, from the Torah the other day, which he didn't apply it to the situation, but clearly the intention was to justify what the Israeli government is doing, where if somebody commits an offense, you can kill man, woman, child, and animal. So he made that reference. So clearly the intention of the Israeli government is to kill as many Palestinians as possible. But I don't believe it technically comes up to the qualification for genocide.
All right. The International Criminal Court. The International Criminal Court has issued a warrant for President Putin of Russia on the charge that Russia forcefully removed a number of children from Ukraine and have them in Russia. So let's talk now about conduct of states that could be hauled before the ICC, International Criminal Court, and whether warrants should be issued for them. They seem to be in the global south, not the EU and Western countries, perhaps with the exception of Ireland, that they should, Netanyahu and Israeli leaders should be taken to the ICC. 5 countries, including Bolivia and South Africa and Bangladesh, have asked the ICC to investigate war crimes in Gaza. Now, to Clement, war crimes.
Yes. We had a seminar at Red House, which the Dragon Research Center sponsored a seminar at Red House on the Palestinian issue a couple of weeks ago. And we had an extremely good turnout. Out of that seminar came the march that was held around the city by, I think it was the Guyana Islamic Trust basically, and some other supportive organizations and individuals.
The first one was by UG students. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Now, at that seminar, two issues arose. One that was kind of contentious among the audience. One was the question of a proposal came that from one of the members in the audience that an arrest warrant should be issued for Netanyahu. And the other one was that he should be tried for war crimes. And then there was another one about breaking diplomatic relations with Israel. So it was good that those issues came up because the people in the audience was able to discuss these things and ventilate their views on it. Eventually, after lengthy discussions on those three issues, we decided that we wouldn't include in the final statement coming out from the seminar the question of an arrest warrant being issued for Netanyahu, nor the breaking of diplomatic relations, nor the question of reference to war crimes, because for some in the audience, these matters weren't clearly crystallized as yet. It wasn't very clear. And then what came out also was that there appeared to be double standards. Now, there was a very interesting commentary today on Al Jazeera, where it showed that Russia's invasion of Ukraine resulted in the death of 351 children. 351 children. With Gaza, is 5,500 children. According to UNESCO, it's the largest number of children killed in any local war in the world. Now,
going back in time.
Yeah, Putin, an arrest warrant was issued for Putin for a number of issues. When compared to Gaza, it's like chalk to cheese. And that is why this whole question by a lot of commentators from the West, and incidentally, it would appear to me, having followed this thing on a day-by-day basis, that there's a shift that is now taking place in the Western media and in Western circles, governmental and non-governmental, more and more in support of the Palestinian cause. But I guess sometime we will come to that. But let's stick to the question that you asked, which is that there appears to be double standards in the application of what is war crimes or what are war crimes related to Russia, Ukraine, Israel, Gaza. Because how do you explain the sanctions imposed on Russia when you look at what Russia is alleged to have done? I don't see any reports about Russia bombing schools or hospitals in Ukraine. I haven't seen that. Maybe there is, but I haven't seen any. But in Gaza, Ralph referred to the number of people who have been killed, the number of children that have been killed, the number of premature babies that have been killed and had to be removed and shipped to Egypt. So when you do a check of crimes committed by Israel and crimes committed by Putin, without repeating myself, it appears to be chalk to cheese. Yet an international arrest warrant has been issued for Putin, none for Netanyahu, and what's his name has been charged for war crimes. Putin, not Netanyahu. There was also an interesting discussion on the question of the influence of the Israelis in the International Criminal Court. That you're not going to get anywhere in the International Criminal Court, because I saw somewhere where I think about 300 distinguished legal experts from around the world have formed a network where they are now preparing as a group of 300 strong, or maybe they might get more, to go to the ICJ to treat with with the Gaza thing in the context of the displacement of the Palestinians in Palestine. So, I emphasize the question of application of the concepts or practices of war crimes in one situation versus another where there seem to be double standards. And in this regard, the International Criminal Court it has been brought into greater focus now on whether Palestine would ever succeed in getting the court to move against Israel on the crimes that they've committed against the Palestinian people, however they may wish to describe them in the terminologies that are acceptable to the ICJ.
Ralph, I've been reading your pieces on Conversation Tree, which is reproduced in Stabrook. Last Sunday, you had a real strong condemnation. You would, as a lawyer of more than 30, 40 years practice, and as a politician who have traveled abroad and represented Guyana, are war crimes being committed as this program is on right now?
Well, war crimes are being committed as we speak. The problem with Israel and the rest of the world is the United States protects Israel. The United States has applied over 40 vetoes against Israel since the 6-Day War.
In 1967.
Yes, and it has protected Israel from international sanction. The head of the International Criminal Court is a British lawyer, and
who has a Muslim name, Khan.
Who has a I'm not interested in his name so much or his religion, but he's British. Now, the swiftness, as Clement mentioned, the swiftness with which they indicted Putin, not for killing anybody, for allegedly kidnapping a number of children from Russia to Ukraine, is a contrast to the silence of the International Criminal Court on Israel from day one, when the Israeli Defense Minister imposed a blockade of food, fuel, electricity, and water against the citizens of Gaza. That was a war crime. The carpet bombing of civilians in Gaza, amounting to the equivalent of 5 million US people in the US, a country with a population like the US would have been about 5 million people. That's the extent of the savagery of Israel on the people of Gaza. So that is a war crime. You can't attack a hospital in a war, because that is a war crime. Now, in order to avoid the allegation of war crimes, Israel said that the Al-Shifa hospital contains at the bottom of it and on the ground a Hamas nerve center, command center at the bottom. So that is to give it protection. But it turns out that Israel didn't know what was there. And if you don't know that there is a command center, if Israel did not know that there was a command center, the attack against the hospital was a war crime. It's clear now that they have taken over the hospital, kicked out their patients and everybody, ordered patients to leave. and everybody in the hospital who were seeking protection, they ordered them to leave. Now there is no, we can't find, they can't even find a tunnel. They found something like a tunnel, but that's all. Now, what they've showed visually was Hamas taking prisoners that they caught in the hospital. Well, if the people are injured, they clearly look injured when you see the television. They took them into the hospital. So now that's an accusation. Then they showed guns around that are allegedly being hoarded by the gunmen. The BBC took that tape and proved that it had a lot of flaws. It could not be believed. So the bombing of the hospital is a war crime. The displacement of people is a war crime. So they have a lot of war crimes being committed. And the silence of the International Criminal Court is very, very loud. It speaks volumes that all this killing is going on, and people in the Israeli government are blatantly admitting what is going on, and nothing at all. And the reason for that is the West, led by the United States, is protecting Israel. That's basically what happened, giving them the green light. America funds what is going on. It gives Israel the arms and ammunition and the aid which are used to kill Palestinians. It then sends 12 warships, 2 aircraft carriers to protect Israel from any attack. Israel wants a war. Israel wants to go after Iran. Israel wants to go after Lebanon. And there is not going to be another occasion, or there might not be another occasion for a very long time, when Israel has the protection of the U.S. military, warships, and aircraft carriers. So it's poised to expand the war. The U.S. doesn't appear to want to expand the war, to want a regional conflagration, because that can lead to Russia, China all coming into the war and so on. Unpredictable what will happen. So Israel is attacking Lebanon to get the Hezbollah to respond. And if they drag Lebanon and Hezbollah into a war, Iran might come in. The Houthis have seized the ship. They didn't say, they're not blaming the Houthis, they're blaming Iran. So they're bringing Iran into the war. So where this will end, we don't know. The US came out and criticized Israel for attacking Lebanon because they have seen what the program is for Israel. To attack Lebanon, to bring Hezbollah in the war, and to bring Iran into the war. So they have, for the US to publicly criticize Israel is a very, very, very big step. But they publicly criticize Israel for attacking Lebanon. So Israel is being protected and helped by the United States and the Western countries in what they're doing. And they're not going to stop until public pressure mounts to such an extent. Already Biden's poll numbers are dropping. And one of the reasons being stated by the experts in the US for the poll numbers dropping is losing the votes of young people, including young Jews. He's losing the support of young people because of his support for what the Israelis are doing.
I got 3 observations.
Yes,
to make, if you don't mind.
Yes, yes.
The first one is the role of the media.
Yeah, I want you just to bring that. Please expand on
This
that.
whole thing.
And we'll have to expand on that because it is unimaginable.
My whole appreciation of what is happening now compared to when the October the 7th attack started to where it is now. There's been a seismic shift in the media houses in the West particularly. You did mention the South. But the South, we know where the South stands on these issues. They're fundamentally in solidarity, and South Africa is leading the pack, so to speak. Now, it is the role of the media. It's going to be, in my view, the game changer in this whole thing. Because right now, I think Ralph mentioned something, but he didn't make the connection with the role of the media, where, for example, the Israelis appear to be on the defensive now in respect to the propaganda war that is taking place between Hamas or the Hamas and the Israelis. In this sense that they're being exposed on a daily basis. That is to say, the Israeli propaganda is being dismantled on a daily basis. And you have in the West, and the media in the West is going to be critical in this, you know. It's not so much the media in the South, because people already know where the media in the South heart lies. It's the media in the West, the big networks that are changing the tone, and not only the tone, but the content of how they are reporting events as they unfold in Gaza. There are some journalists in big media houses who are now openly questioning the people, or the people in the media houses, the managers or the directors or the boards or whatever, who are trying to gag them, so to speak, and not make them report as reporters objectively as to what is really taking place in Gaza. And they're now coming out against that kind of gagging of how the events ought to be reported objectively as they take place there. So I am saying that, and you know, in the United States, in Europe, particularly United States and Europe, there are two things that have made them shift. The power of the media, who are now reporting more objectively on what is taking place in Gaza, that's one. And two, the massive demonstrations that are taking place in those countries. I was so impressed when I looked at London, for example, to see the humongous number of people. And you know, it tells me that, you know, this word solidarity is a powerful motivating factor. Powerful motivating factor. Some people, when they hear about solidarity, say, I don't want to get involved. But it will seem to me that the Palestinian issue, which has been simmering for years, has now erupted like a volcano. And it is the people on the streets, together with the journalists. By the way, I think over 300, journalists have been killed in this war.
And dozens of UN workers.
And dozens of UN workers as well. The images that are now penetrating the Western media, they can't block it anymore. The images and the quality of the reporting that is now coming out from the Gaza and penetrating the Western media, because they have like a kind of a, what's the thing they call it in Israel that protect them from the missile? The
dome?
Iron what? No, the Iron Dome. The Iron Dome.
Mm.
There was a kind of an Iron Dome in respect to the media in the Western countries, industrialized countries, that was impenetrable, could not be penetrated, impenetrable, if that is the right way.
Impenetrable, yeah.
Impenetrable, yes. You couldn't penetrate it. Now it is happening. There are cracks emerging. And the congressmen, the senators, the MPs, the people who sit in the Bundestag in Germany, they're all seeing what is happening. Remember, somehow or the other, they tend to follow the United States. In the case of Russia and Ukraine, NATO and the whole of Europe is following the United States on the question of Ukraine. At the beginning, in respect to the Israel-Hamas war, They were also following the United States and the Security Council and so forth. But there has been a seismic shift, in my view. Of course, it has to be much more than that. It has to be much more than that. But the point I'm making is that the media, the images coming out from Gaza has penetrated the media iron dome in the West, and that has resulted in the policy makers now putting pressure on their own governments, internal contradictions, on how they ought to deal with first the UN resolution, which managed to barely get passed, with the Palestinians condemned, but the humanitarian corridor, etc., etc. That has allowed, to some extent, an opening up for the progressive and democratic forces and the people in general in the streets in these main capitals. So there's a combination of two things: the role of the media, the power of the media that has now penetrated the Western Iron Dome, and the high degree of solidarity by people in Western countries. Look at the United States. In every major city, thousands have demonstrated, right? In the UK, in Germany, all across Europe, and of course in some of the neighboring Arab countries. And I think it is, I'm not so sure if the ordinary Palestinian people are seeing these things. I'm not sure if they're seeing it. Because the Israelis cut the, the transmission connections and so on. But for us who are not involved, it tells us that the Palestinian people and those in Gaza are not alone. Now finally, for me, what is important is the story behind the war. The stories behind the war. You know what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the humane issues, the human factors, the human factors and the want of a better word, the stories that are behind the bombings. That is to say, stories of the children, stories of the mothers, stories of young girls, stories of young boys, right? How are they making out in this situation? How are they making out? It's almost impossible for us to understand that. You know, I remember in the 1960s when they had this thing in Mackenzie. We had an experience in Mackenzie, the Wisma thing, where refugees, right, displaced persons had to come to Georgetown.
Cornelia Ida on the West Coast, they were very big there.
At first, they were located at some part of the industrial estate.
Yeah, sure.
And then from the industrial estate, they moved them to in those days. The East Coast wasn't that developed as it is now.
Before I bring in Ralph, I need to remind our viewers that the Canadian, American, and French governments say they accepted that the first bombing of a hospital in which 500 people were killed, they accept it was a Hamas rocket that backfired. The New York Times sent in researchers, and the conclusion of the New York Times, the leading newspaper in the United States and one of the leading newspapers in the world, said up to this day, it cannot conclusively said what caused the bombing of the hospital. That goes back to your thing about the media. But Ralph, what our viewers are watching your hand on the table and that thing you have in front of you. What are those things you have in front of you?
Well, I brought
Tell us, you've been writing very pungently.
I brought some notes with me in order to answer any questions which I might be asked. And the headline of the notes, I can read it for you.
Yeah, sure.
My notes deal with the elections that were held in Gaza in 2006, which Hamas won. And Hamas went into the government. The elections were pushed by the United States. Hamas won the elections, entered the government, and President Jimmy Carter we must express our condolences to President Carter for the
His wife
loss
Carter.
of his wife, Rosalind Carter. President Carter concluded it was free and fair elections. The Americans and the Israelis rejected Hamas, and by 2007, their government was not tenable. They stopped all aid and all assistance to Gaza, to the Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank. So the government collapsed, and then they blockaded. In 2007 they blockaded Gaza, and since then Gaza has been an open prison. I spoke about a number of Gazans who have been killed so far. 5,000 children, over 12,000 people now, about 13,000. I spoke about Gaza being an open-air prison, which was the words used by Prime Minister David Cameron in 2012. I noted about the unemployment and poverty. There's over 40% unemployment and 60% poverty rate, two of the highest in the world. I talked about the revolt. It's a revolt of prisoners. These words were used by a political scientist by the name of Norman Finkelstein. He didn't use those words, but I turned his phrase a little bit. Norman Finkelstein is one of the world leading authorities on Gaza and on the Palestinian issue. He said it was the revolt of slaves. So I say it was a revolt of prisoners. The prisoners of Gaza revolted. And there's an Ilan Pape, who is an Israeli professor of political science at Exeter University in the United Kingdom, called Hamas a national liberation organization. And he said the operation that Hamas undertook was a military operation because 30% of the people killed were soldiers, and they went for the military apparatus surrounding Gaza. Those are the military areas that they first attacked and destroyed. He condemned the killing of civilians, and incidentally, the killing of the civilians, first it was 1,400, then it came down to 1,200, now it's 1,175. Why the drop? The drop was because bodies were burnt, which they said that the Palestinians did. Brutalized, broke the buildings up and burnt these bodies. But from 1,400 to 1,200 was because the 200 people who were burnt were Palestinians, were Hamas people. They call them the terrorists. Well, how were these terrorists burnt? Did they burn themselves? Did they walk with fire equipment to burn themselves? These were burnt by helicopters shooting missiles to these buildings. Israel has a policy. These things are very little known. Israel has a policy called the Hannibal Principle, which was implemented at one time but now revoked. When an Israeli soldier is caught by the Palestinians, bomb the place, bomb the people as much as you can to kill the soldier, because to avoid having to do exchanges with the Palestinians. And they actually did that to a soldier called Goldstein or something like that. His name began with Gold. They killed 100 Palestinians plus the soldier because they bombed the area in which they thought he was. Kill him. That policy, I understand, no longer exists. But the objective of the military was to kill the Palestinians whether or not civilians or Israeli soldiers are in the way. Just kill them so that So that is how you had 200 Palestinians burnt up. They lie all the time. So they lie about these things. They lie about the babies who were beheaded, 40 babies beheaded. They had Biden saying that they were beheaded and that he saw the pictures. is one baby unfortunately died, one 10-month-old baby who died. So these lies are just like the lies when the Israeli journalist Shireen Abu Akleh was killed.
Yeah.
It took a year for them to admit that was an Israeli bullet. They had 4 boys who were playing on the beach in 2014 who were killed by Israeli drones. It took several years for Israel to accept. Years, I'm telling you. Even though journalists were in hotels by the beach, foreign journalists saw that these boys were killed by drones. And the Israelis refused to accept it for years. So they lie, and the journalists, a large number of journalists, know that they lie. But with this calamity, this vicious attack on civilians by Hamas, resulted in the press, the Western media, coming down and supporting the Israeli government having a right to defend itself. Now, the journalists, the honest and progressive journalists who take an objective position are now emerging because of the lies, the propaganda, and the killing and the bombing that Israel is doing. The journalists are now emerging out and criticizing. The BBC criticized this television display about guns in the hospital. The BBC criticized it. The BBC had 5 or 10 minutes. So that is what is happening.
I want to ask both of you to lean on your experience as 2 long-standing practitioners, which your work would have carried you outside of Guyana, and you would have to study decades of politics. Is it possible, I raised this question before in one of these programs, is it possible that if there is a clash with Hezbollah and Israel, and the war spreads, and the US uses the excuse and Israel to attack Iran, would China's long dream of uniting Taiwan, would they use that international conflagration to finally integrate Taiwan? Do you think China would do that?
I don't think right
because
now,
if Iran gets touched, it's going to have it's a huge war. It's going to happen there.
well,
What would China do?
look at it this way.
Now, Max, both of you.
Use a microcosm, or use the Russia-Ukraine war now as a microcosm of what can probably lead you to look at the question that you just raised. In this sense, that the role of China in respect to the Russia-Ukraine war is from what we could see, we don't know, but it appears to be hands-off and strictly diplomatic, trying to find a diplomatic solution to it. They've put forward a 10-point plan for the resolution.
No, but when would China get another opportunity?
Right,
if there's a war in the Middle East,
I'm coming to
isn't that an opportunity for China?
I'm not so sure, because it doesn't necessarily follow ipso facto that if Iran is attacked, that China will get involved, or that the BRICS countries then would get involved. But if you restrict it to China, I doubt it, that China would use that as an opportunity to go for Taiwan. That's a very complicated. That would mean a war, you know. That would mean a world war, because America
would leave what's going on with them and Iran and go to Taiwan.
No, I'm not saying they would. I thought you were suggesting they would.
No, you were saying that if China goes to Taiwan, there's a big war in the Middle East. Iran is being attacked. United States is involved. The whole world now is engulfed in what's
And
going
you
on
were
in the
saying
Middle
in
East.
that kind
You
of situation, that China would use to
But
get
don't
to
you think
Taiwan.
that would be the best? When next would they get an opportunity? Well,
I don't think so.
I'm not sure about that.
The speculation in the West has been that if Putin succeeds in Ukraine, or while the war is going on in Ukraine, China may well attack Taiwan and integrate Taiwan with China. But China is a very responsible country. That's the first thing. The second thing is, and the media creating this idea that China is some kind of type of hothead is totally untrue and without foundation. China will invade Taiwan if Taiwan declares independence, or if the United States does some foolish act to promote the independence of Taiwan. That's the only way China will invade Taiwan. If I do not think that China will utilize United States occupation in a war in the Middle East to make it worse and go after Taiwan, I don't think they will do that. What China will do is to seek to prevent a war, because it will harm China if there's a war. Seek to prevent a war, and if a war happens, to do the best it can to stop it and to bring peace. I think that is what China wants and what China will do. I don't think China is going to invade Taiwan.
Do you know that right now in Beijing there's a conference on the Middle East?
Yes, I know.
Convened by the Chinese to find a solution to the Middle East problem.
That
tells us something, you know.
I want us to touch on this because we did say in the advertisement that you guys will look at the future of international relations. A country of 8,000 square miles, a 9 million population, which is small comparatively. Indonesia is over 200 million. Pakistan is over 170 million. But you have a country of 8,000 square miles, which is a very tiny part of Guyana, and 9 million people, brutalizing a little part in the Middle East called Gaza, in which 5,000 women and children have died. And they are being encouraged by the West. Is this the moment where the people of the third world will now see what the West is like, and are we now witnessing a greater polarization? I mean, just look at Bangladesh taking Israel to the International Criminal Court. South Africa is leading the thing. Has the West now showed that it was never the good guy?
The South didn't have to wait for that to happen, for them to realize what is happening now in terms of a polarized world, and where they put it, what position they should take on these major global issues. Climate change, for example, has also exposed the industrialized nation. You're going to have COP, I think, 28 soon in Dubai. And you will have the same kind of problems again, the log jams, finance. So I'm saying that the countries, developing countries, didn't have to wait for a Gaza to explode.
To see the double standards of the West?
They've seen it before.
This is terrible. People are dying every day.
They've seen it at the WTO. They've seen it at they've seen it during COVID. They've seen it during COVID with the distribution of the vaccines and so on. And they've seen it historically. They've seen it in terms of the struggle for independence. They've seen, these people have experienced these things. Although many of the leaders have gone, the people, the population, there are people there who still understand these things. So I'm saying that I don't think that the emergence of BRICS, the talk now of traded in currencies to replace the US dollar, all that is responding to a change in the global environment that is making the South becoming more and more assertive in this war.
But Ralph, hasn't these war crimes or genocide and the West support for this small country bombing a little piece of land, isn't this going to create a further division between North and South?
It will. You know, one of the greatest, one of the best known and best, you should know his name at least, political scientist in the U.S., John Mearsheimer, who has studied Israel and who has studied and written extensively about many things, world politics, but including the relationship with the United States and Israel. He said that United States relationship with Israel, he said it's promoted by the Israeli lobby. Mainly. I don't agree with him. I mean, with due respect to this great man, I don't agree with him fully, because the relationship with the United States and Israel was based on the United States creating an imperialist outpost in the Middle East when national liberation was with Nasser and all these people was very prominent in the 60s. And that is when Israel, remember the United States stopped Israel when it was Israel and France. It was when they wanted to invade Egypt over the nationalization of the Suez Canal. So the relationship between Israel and United States and Israel really became very firm from the 67 war, from just before then, when they were promoting Israel because of as an outpost for imperialism in the Middle East. But the whole Middle East now, especially the big countries like Egypt and so on, are now pro-US. Syria is destroyed.
Libya destroyed.
Libya is destroyed.
Iraq is
destroyed and pacified, even though Iran has a big influence there. But they maintain good. So they don't need to pander to Israel. What they're doing, defending Israel, they don't need to do it. They should have, Mearsheimer says, they should have normal relations with Israel. And if they were having normal relations with Israel, they would stop this war. But this war is hurting the United States. It's harming the United States. It's damaging its relations with the South. It's damaging its relations with it has no relation with Russia. It's damaging its relations with India. It has broken up this arrangement it wanted between Saudi Arabia and Israel. That's finished. This was a big plank of Biden's policy. That's gone. That's not going to come back.
But before we wrap up, wouldn't this war also may result in a Trump presidency, and that may be the end of the world?
It may result in a Trump presidency, which will be very dangerous for the whole world.
Well, you know, Trump is the only president that never had a war during his presidency.
Yeah.
And Trump is gaining support.
Trump went to North Korea and spoke to Rocket Man. Remember that?
Yeah.
So he had this penchant, so to speak, to help to diffuse what is called hotbeds of tension.
But he's a very unpredictable man. Before we close, just very briefly, after this war, the International Criminal Court, would countries be inclined? South Africa was diplomatic. Whatever happened when they had the BRICS meeting there, Putin didn't go. But with this double standard now, is it possible that you will see states withdrawing from the ICC, or states refusing to charge some states refusing?
I thought you were going to ask another question, which is the morning after, the day after, so to speak, in Gaza. Who replaces what? And already we're hearing that nobody's going to accept a government on the backs of Israeli tanks in Gaza. That's an interesting debate.
Yeah, but we got to go, Ralph.
Yeah. Well, I agree. Well, Biden has said that he will implement or support
Two-state
the
solution.
two-state solution. Well, they haven't done it since 1967.
Well, we're going to get it now quickly.
How are they going to get?
But with this war with Israel murdering people by the thousands, aren't we now may finally get to two-state?
One of the things the Hamas has said is that this attack and what is happening now is going to be the harbinger that will result in things which never happened before.
Just 30 seconds each, and we have to go.
Yeah, one I want to close. I'll let Ralph have the last word. I'm going to say this, that the U.S. has done a lot of work in the Middle East, among the Arab countries, resulting in what he just said. They've managed to sort of
subdue the big
Arab nations, right? In all the shuttle diplomacy, all they've been doing is talking to governments, and maybe that's what the protocol demands. But the pressure ain't coming from the governments, you know. The pressure is coming from the Houthis.
I just remember something. Let Ralph Francis say, and I just want to ask you a question.
Let me finish up.
We got to go.
They haven't spoken to the Houthis. They haven't spoken to Hezbollah. They haven't spoken to the Hamas. And that's where the pressure really coming from, not from the governments.
Ralph?
Well, I think we need a ceasefire, and we should end this program by calling for a ceasefire.
I agree with that. I
agree
with a ceasefire.
Israel and Hamas.
We agree with a ceasefire. We agree with the opening up of humanitarian channel, not on a piecemeal basis, full scale and non-stop.
Should we end this program by really in our hearts and our souls expressing unlimited sympathy for the parents who have lost their thousands of babies and children in Gaza? This has been the Gildarie Freddie Kissoon Show. We've had two enlightened politicians of long standing expressing their take, their analysis, and the predictions about the world after Gaza and about Gaza. Thanks for joining us. We'll be with you on Wednesday. As I normally say, bye-bye, catch you later.